Have you ever been humiliated in public because of your appearance? Emily Parker has. She is a young black woman from a humble background who was at a luxury restaurant wearing a simple dress and carrying the sweet gaze of someone who just wanted to live a special night. A housekeeper since the age of 13, hardworking, dignified, but in that upscale restaurant, her mere presence was enough to disturb. And who felt most offended? Mr. Grant, a white, wealthy man, used to humiliating others with sharp words and cruel smiles. In front of everyone, he made her feel small, invisible. But what Mr. Grant didn't know was that, in that very place, another man was watching everything in silence. An idol, a giant, Michael Jordan. And what he did that night, no one would ever forget. Keep watching the video and let yourself be moved by this story of justice. Emily pressed her slender fingers against the fabric of her navy blue dress, the only one she owned for special occasions. It wasn't designer. It didn't have prestigious labels hidden in the collar. It was just a simple dress she'd found at a clearance sale 2 years ago, but she treasured it like one of her most precious memories. In the mirror of the small apartment she shared with her ailing mother, Emily adjusted the low bun she'd made in her curly hair. Her almond-shaped eyes, a deep brown, reflected a mix of anxiety and hope. The yellowish light of the bedside lamp illuminated her dark skin, revealing small lines around her eyes. Marks of someone who, at 24, already carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay, Mom?" Emily asked for the third time, turning toward the gray-haired woman watching her proudly from the bed. "Sweetheart, Mrs. Thompson invited you personally. That doesn't happen every day," her mother replied in between soft coughs. "Go and enjoy it, for both of us." Emily nodded, biting her lower lip to hold back emotion. She picked up her small clutch, a Christmas gift from her employer, and left. In the cracked tile hallway of the old building, her low-heeled shoes echoed like a reminder that, for one night, she would be part of a different world. Mrs. Thompson's car, a silver Mercedes sedan, waited at the curb. The elegant white woman in her early 60s but flawlessly disguised by expensive creams and exquisite fashion sense, smiled when she saw Emily. "You look lovely, dear," said Mrs. Thompson, opening the passenger door herself, to the driver's discomfort. "That blue suits you perfectly." During the ride, Emily kept her hands folded in her lap, trying to control the subtle tremble in her fingers. In 10 years of working as a housekeeper, she had never been invited to an event like this. Over the last 3 years with Mrs. Thompson, she had developed something close to a friendship with her employer. But even so, she felt as if she were crossing an invisible boundary. "Le ciel is simply divine," Mrs. Thompson commented as the car glided through the city streets. "The wait list is months long, but Andrew, you remember my nephew? Knows the chef. Tonight is special, Emily. A charity gala for underprivileged children." Emily smiled, thinking of the irony. She herself had been one of those children. The car stopped in front of an imposing building. Golden lights lit up a marble facade, and a red carpet stretched to the entrance. Men in tuxedos and women in silk dresses and sparkling jewelry entered in a constant flow, like a stream of wealth and privilege. Emily took a deep breath. "I can wait in the car, Mrs. Thompson. Really, I don't mind." "Nonsense," her employer replied, already stepping out. "You're going to love it. The food is amazing, and I want you to try that chocolate souffle I'm always talking about." Reluctantly, Emily stepped out of the car. The night air was cool, but her cheeks felt hot. She knew she wasn't invisible. On the contrary, she felt the curious glances, fleeting and almost imperceptible, but still present. In her simple dress, wearing no jewelry besides small faux pearl earrings, she was a fish out of water. "Keep your head up," Mrs. Thompson whispered, as if reading her thoughts. "You have just as much right to be here as anyone else." Emily straightened her shoulders. Her mother always said, "Dignity costs nothing, but it's worth everything." With that in mind, she climbed the steps beside her employer. The inside of Le Ciel was like a dream come to life. Crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceiling, casting golden light over impeccably set tables. Elaborate floral arrangements scented the air, blending with the aroma of expensive spices and aged wine. An orchestra played softly in the corner, their violins creating a timeless elegance. Emily had never seen anything like it outside of the movies. Every fork, every glass, every napkin folded in intricate shapes. Everything looked too precious to touch. At the entrance, a tall, slender man in a flawless suit greeted Mrs. Thompson with a rehearsed smile. The maître-d'hôtel, with his slick-back gray hair and perfect posture, consulted a list with studied attention. "Mrs. Thompson, a pleasure to have you with us this evening," he said in a velvety voice. "Table for two, correct?" "Yes, Richard. This is Emily, my special guest tonight." The maître d's eyes shifted to Emily. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, something in his gaze changed. The professional mask remained, but his eyes, cold and calculating, scanned Emily from head to toe in a quick, merciless assessment. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he said, "Certainly this way, ladies." As they followed the maître d' through the tables, Emily noticed him subtly signaling to a young waiter passing by. A barely noticeable movement, a meaningful glance. The young staff member looked at Emily, then at the maître d', and nodded slightly. Emily's heart sped up. There was something about that gesture, that silent exchange of looks, that made her feel as if the luxurious floor beneath her feet could disappear at any moment. As she was led to the table, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this dreamlike night could quickly turn into something entirely different. Emily followed the maître d' through the tables of Le Ciel, each step echoing in her mind as though she were walking on forbidden ground. Her fingers clutched her small purse as she tried to ignore the growing discomfort. Mrs. Thompson walked ahead with the ease of someone who belonged, casually chatting with the maître d' about the restaurant's updated decor. "The orchids are a lovely touch," Mrs. Thompson remarked, pointing to a lavish arrangement. "Much more elegant than last season's lilies." Emily observed, absorbed, the soft gleam of perfectly aligned silverware on immaculate white linen tablecloths, the delicate clink of crystal glasses, the polite murmur of carefully measured conversations. A world where every detail was calculated, designed to exude exclusivity. As they moved through the main hall, Emily noticed the first change. A woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, diamonds draped around her neck, paused her conversation as Emily passed. Her eyes, cold as the jewels she wore, followed Emily with a curiosity that bordered on clinical, before turning to her companion with a slightly raised eyebrow. "Your table, ladies," announced the maître d', pulling out a chair for Mrs. Thompson at a table positioned near one of the large windows overlooking the restaurant's illuminated garden. Emily hesitated for a moment, but the maître d', already occupied with Mrs. Thompson's napkin, didn't move in her direction. It was her employer who gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite. "Today's menu includes our special 7-course tasting," explained the maître d', handing them leather-bound menus. "The sommelier will be here shortly to suggest the wine pairings." Emily opened the menu and immediately felt a wave of panic. There were no prices listed, only names of dishes in French that she could barely pronounce. As her eyes scanned the unfamiliar words, she felt the weight of another gaze upon her. At the table diagonally across from theirs, a man of about 50 was watching her over his menu. Dressed impeccably in a suit that probably cost more than all the furniture in Emily's apartment, he carried the kind of confidence that came from generations of privilege. The gray at his temples gave him a distinguished look, and the golden watch on his wrist gleamed with every calculated movement. When his eyes met Emily's, there wasn't even a hint of embarrassment at being caught staring. On the contrary, his lips curled into a smile devoid of any kindness. "Any doubts about the menu, dear?" asked Mrs. Thompson, noticing Emily's tense expression. I don't know what foie gras is," Emily admitted in a low voice. "Oh, it's duck liver pâté. Maybe not for beginners," Mrs. Thompson laughed softly. "I recommend the velouté de champignons to start. It's a creamy mushroom soup, absolutely divine." Emily nodded, grateful for the guidance, but aware that their conversation had attracted more attention. A young woman at a nearby table nudged her friend, and both glanced at Emily, covering their giggles with silk napkins. The man who had been watching her, Mr. Grant, as Emily would later hear his name mentioned, made a barely perceptible gesture to a passing waiter. The young man approached, leaning in to hear what the customer had to say. Emily tried to focus on Mrs. Thompson's conversation about the charity the evening's event supported, something about scholarships for underprivileged children, but couldn't help noticing how the waiter glanced in her direction as Mr. Grant whispered something in his ear. The man finished his comment with a contained laugh, laced with malice. The waiter nodded, professional but visibly uncomfortable, and walked away. Mr. Grant returned to his menu, but not before casting another long glance at Emily, this time clearly assessing her simple dress. "And they managed to raise over $1 million last year," Mrs. Thompson continued. "Emily? Are you listening?" "Sorry, Mrs. Thompson." Emily turned her attention back to her employer. "I'm a little overwhelmed." "Understandable," the older woman smiled. "The first time at Luciel is always overwhelming. But relax, you're my guest. You belong here just as much as anyone else." The words were kind, but Emily felt they weren't true, at least not to the others present. A group of 3 men at a distant table didn't bother hiding their stares, chuckling among themselves when they noticed her discomfort. The sommelier approached, a thin man with encyclopedic wine knowledge who spoke exclusively to Mrs. Thompson, as if Emily were invisible. "For the starter, I suggest the 2019 Chablis Premier Cru. Delicate citrus notes, perfect to accompany seafood." Mrs. Thompson accepted the suggestion, and Emily tried to enjoy the experience. The wine was served ceremoniously. The first course arrived. Small works of art on fine porcelain. Emily watched her employer to see which fork to use. That's when the waiter who had spoken with Mr. Grant returned, this time addressing their table directly. His young face looked tense, caught between professional duty and the evident discomfort of the task he had to carry out. "Excuse me," he said in a low but firm voice, positioning himself near Emily's chair. "Would you mind standing up for a moment, please?" Mrs. Thompson froze mid-gesture, her wine glass suspended in the air. "Is something wrong?" The waiter avoided their eyes, fixing his gaze on some random point above their heads. His rigid posture carried the warning of something unpleasant about to happen. "There is an issue," he finally said, looking directly at Emily. "I need you to come with me." Emily stayed motionless for a moment, her hands trembling under the table. The silence that followed the waiter's request seemed to amplify each beat of her pounding heart. Around her, several conversations had quieted, as if the entire dining room awaited her reaction. "Come with you?" Mrs. Thompson repeated, placing the wineglass on the table with precise control. "We're in the middle of dinner. What could be so urgent?" The waiter, young, maybe just a few years older than Emily, looked torn between discomfort and professional obligation. His eyes shifted toward a point behind the main counter. "There was a situation with the reservation," he explained, his voice low but loud enough for neighboring tables to hear. "The manager would like to discuss it in private." Emily felt heat rise up her neck, coloring her cheeks. She knew with the clarity that only comes from repeated experience what was happening. It wasn't the first time. It probably wouldn't be the last. "This is ridiculous." Mrs. Thompson placed her napkin on the table and sat up straighter. "I made this reservation weeks ago, and if there's an issue with my guests, you can address it right here." A murmur spread through the nearby tables. A woman covered her mouth with her hand, whispering something to her companion. Diagonally across, Mr. Grant watched the scene with malicious interest, a glass of red wine suspended near his lips. "Ma'am, I'm just following instructions." The waiter lowered his voice even more. "Please, if you could both come with me." Emily had already prepared to stand when a figure appeared beside the table. A middle-aged man with impeccably combed hair and a tailored suit that screamed authority. A discreet badge identified him as the restaurant manager. "Mrs. Thompson," he greeted with a slight bow, completely ignoring Emily's presence. "I apologize for the interruption, but there seems to be a misunderstanding with your reservation." "Misunderstanding?" Mrs. Thompson's voice took on a sharp tone. "Explain yourself, Leonard. I'm dining with my guest, and we've been rudely interrupted." The manager gave Emily a quick once-over. Her simple dress, the lack of jewelry, her uneasy posture. His smile didn't change, but his eyes visibly chilled. "Mrs. Thompson, as a longtime client, you know Luciel has certain standards to uphold." He paused deliberately. Your reservation noted a business dinner, not a companion of a different nature. The insinuation hung in the air like poison. This is Emily, who has worked in my home for years and is my guest tonight, replied Mrs. Thompson, purposefully raising her voice. And I don't see how that could be a problem for your standards, Leonard. The manager leaned in slightly, speaking more quietly. Mrs. Thompson, certain profiles simply don't align with the environment we cultivate here. His voice was soft, professional, but loaded with meaning. Perhaps your guest would feel more comfortable at another establishment. I can recommend a few places that are more suitable. At those words, something broke inside Emily. The humiliation she had tried to avoid now wrapped around her completely, exposed before dozens of people. Her crime? Existing, taking up space, daring to sit at a table where she wasn't welcome. She noticed from the corner of her eye how Mr. Grant was watching the scene with thinly veiled satisfaction. He had started this, she realized. The conversation with the waiter, the look of disdain, the silent complaint that now materialized in her public expulsion. This is absolutely unacceptable, protested Mrs. Thompson, her indignation genuine. I'm calling Andrew immediately. Your nephew will be very interested in hearing how Le Ciel treats its guests. The manager remained unfazed, used to dealing with threats from influential clients. I'm sorry if there's been a misunderstanding, ma'am. Our reservation policy is very clear regarding dress code and expected behavior. He discreetly gestured to the waiter. And of course, we understand if you choose to end your dinner in solidarity. Everything consumed so far will naturally be on the house. The falseness of the offer was as transparent as it was cruel, a way to let Mrs. Thompson save face while the restaurant maintained its exclusivity. Emily finally found her voice, though fragile and nearly inaudible. Mrs. Thompson, please don't worry. She placed her napkin on the table and stood up with all the dignity she could muster. I can wait in the car. Her knees trembled, but she held her chin high. The surrounding conversations had almost completely stopped. Every eye in the main dining hall was fixed on her, some with morbid curiosity, others with disdain, a few with quiet compassion. This isn't over, Mrs. Thompson insisted, her face red with anger. Leonard, you have no idea the mess you're creating for yourself. I understand your frustration, replied the manager, calm in the knowledge that the unwritten rules of society were on his side. But we're simply following established protocol. Certain environments require a certain homogeneity. It was at that moment that Emily noticed, for the first time, a man sitting alone at a table partially hidden by an ornate column, tall, even while seated, with broad shoulders and a presence that seemed to fill the space around him effortlessly. His dark skin contrasted with the perfectly tailored dark suit. Unlike the other guests, he didn't stare at her with curiosity or disdain. His eyes, deep and attentive, observed the scene with calculated intensity, as if analyzing every word, every gesture, every nuance of the situation. Emily didn't recognize his face immediately. It seemed vaguely and strangely familiar, like someone she might have seen in a magazine or on television years ago. But there was something in his posture, in the way his fingers tapped slowly on the table, that suggested he wasn't just another passive spectator of this humiliation spectacle. As Emily began to walk toward the exit, feeling the weight of every gaze on her shoulders, she didn't notice that the man had stopped tapping his fingers and was now watching the scene with a quiet resolution forming in his eyes. Emily took 3 steps toward the exit, each one heavier than the last. The Le Ciel dining hall, once a dreamlike setting, now felt like a courtroom where she had been judged and condemned without the right to defend herself. Mrs. Thompson was still protesting, her indignant voice competing with the awkward silence that had swallowed the restaurant. Then the laughter began. It wasn't a restrained or polite laugh, the kind one hears in refined settings. It was deliberately loud, designed to draw attention and humiliate, a sonic weapon aimed directly at Emily. Mr. Grant, still holding his glass of wine, laughed with his head thrown back. The sound sliced through the air like a blade, causing all eyes to shift from Emily to him. For a moment, she felt a perverse relief not to be the center of attention anymore. But it was only for a moment. Frankly, Leonard, Mr. Grant said, addressing the manager with the familiarity of a regular client, You really shouldn't have to explain the obvious. Some people truly don't know their place. His words hung in the air like toxic smoke. The manager had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but did nothing to intervene. At Mr. Grant's table, his business companions, two middle-aged men with bored expressions, suddenly became very interested in their plates. "Do we need signs at the entrance now?" he continued, swirling the wine in his glass with calculated motions. "Something like, 'Servants, please use the back entrance.'" An uncomfortable murmur spread through the dining hall. Some patrons lowered their eyes, ashamed not by the situation, but by witnessing something so explicitly cruel. Others exchanged nervous glances. A few, very few, seemed genuinely disturbed. "Richard," Mr. Grant called to the maitre d' walking by, "do you remember that restaurant in Paris? What was it called? The one that had a separate elevator for staff?" He pointed a finger in Emily's direction, not bothering to lower his voice. To avoid this kind of confusion, Emily felt her blood pounding in her temples. The initial humiliation had morphed into something different, a silent rage, a fire that began to consume the lump in her throat. Her eyes burned with restrained tears, not of sadness, but of a deep, primal indignation. Mrs. Thompson, still seated, looked about to explode. "This is absolutely disgusting. How dare you?" "Mrs. Thompson, please," the manager interrupted, clearly more concerned with the employer's reaction than Mr. Grant's behavior. "Let's resolve this discreetly." "Discreetly?" Mrs. Thompson's voice rose even higher. "After such deplorable behavior? I'll make sure the entire Monroe Foundation board knows how Le Ciel treats its guests." Mr. Grant merely smiled, unbothered. With a dismissive gesture, as if swatting away an annoying fly, he said, "Oh, come on, Thompson. You know how these places work. That's exactly why we pay so much, to maintain a certain standard." He then looked directly at Emily, his cold eyes sizing her up as though she were an unpleasant object, a stain on the perfect carpet of his privileged world. "Look at her," he continued, pointing with his chin. "That little department store dress, those cheap shoes. Even she knows she doesn't belong here. It's written all over her face." Emily felt something snap inside her, like a dam that finally gives way after withstanding too much pressure for too long. A lifetime of being invisible, of being less, of being the other, it all converged into that moment. She stopped, slowly turned around. The entire dining room seemed to hold its breath. In a voice low but surprisingly firm, Emily looked directly into Mr. Grant's eyes and said, "I am just as human as you." Words, simple, direct, and undeniable. And yet, revolutionary in that context. The silence that followed was absolute, as if someone had paused reality itself. Silverware froze in midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the background music seemed to fade. Mr. Grant's face, previously animated by cruelty, went still. For a brief moment, confusion flashed in his eyes. The confusion of a man who had never expected resistance, especially not from someone he deemed insignificant. That confusion quickly turned into something far more dangerous: outrage. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice now low and threatening. Emily didn't flinch. Something in her posture had changed. Her shoulders, once hunched under the weight of shame, now stood straight. Her eyes, once evasive, now looked ahead without fear. "I said I'm just as human as you are," she repeated, each word clear and precise. "I've been working since I was 13. I take care of my sick mother. I dream, I suffer, and I fight every single day. My worth as a person is not measured by the price of my dress or the name I carry." A movement in the distance caught Emily's attention. The tall man who had been silently watching from a partially hidden table had straightened up, his eyes now fixed on the scene with renewed interest. Mrs. Thompson was looking at Emily with a mix of surprise and pride. The manager seemed unsure how to react. And as for the other customers, some were clearly uncomfortable, others secretly impressed, a few openly supportive. Mr. Grant's face turned from red to purple. The wine glass in his hand trembled slightly. The audacity, the sheer audacity of being confronted, of being equated with someone he considered beneath him, was something his carefully constructed world could not tolerate. With a deliberately slow motion, he placed the glass on the table. His chair scraped against the marble floor with a harsh screech as he stood up. Tall, imposing, fueled by decades of unquestioned privilege, Mr. Grant now rose like a storm ready to break over Emily. The silence in Le Ciel took on a dense, almost tangible quality, like the charged air before a thunderstorm. Mr. Grant advanced slowly toward Emily, each step calculated to maximize intimidation. His entire body radiated an aura of authority used to never being questioned. The kind of man who rarely needed to raise his voice to get what he wanted. The restaurant staff remained frozen in place, like background actors locked in a dramatic tableau. The manager took a hesitant step forward, more concerned about the establishment's reputation than Emily's well-being. "Mr. Grant, perhaps it would be better—" "Silence," Grant ordered, without even looking at the manager, who immediately recoiled like a scolded subordinate. Emily felt every cell in her body begging her to run, to lower her eyes, to apologize, anything to escape that moment. But her feet felt cemented to the floor, like in a nightmare where escape is impossible. The courage she'd felt seconds ago began to falter in the face of his physical presence. Mr. Grant stopped just an arm's length from Emily. The difference in height forced her to look up, increasing her sense of vulnerability. His expensive cologne invaded her senses, a fragrance that likely cost more than her weekly paycheck. "So you think you're equal to me?" His voice was soft now, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more threatening. "How interesting." From Mrs. Thompson's table came a movement. Her employer had stood up. "That's enough. Step away from her immediately, or I—" "Or you what, Thompson?" Grant shot back without taking his eyes off Emily. "Disinvite me from your charity galas? Call your friends on the board? Please." He waved his hand dismissively. "Don't interfere where you're not wanted." Mr. Grant leaned in slightly, bringing his face closer to Emily's. His icy blue eyes locked onto hers with the intensity of a predator. "Let me explain something to you since you seem confused about your place in the world," he said, each word articulated with surgical precision. "You are not equal to me. You will never be equal to me. Do you know why?" He paused deliberately, waiting for his words to sink in. "Because you're just a little maid, a cleaner, someone who wipes away what others leave behind and is grateful for the privilege." His voice took on a near-instructional tone, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "You're here because someone took pity on you, a charitable act, the same kind that probably pays for your mother's treatment. Isn't that right?" The words hit Emily like acid, corroding the thin layer of dignity she was still clinging to. They weren't just words. They were the spoken form of the glances, the whispers, the slammed doors she'd faced her whole life, the crystallization of a system that saw her as lesser, disposable, invisible except when convenient. A tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She tried to hold it back, desperate not to show weakness, but it was too late. The dam had broken. "Oh, and now the tears," Grant observed with a satisfied smile. "Typical. When faced with reality, you resort to crying. Do you know how many like you I've seen weep after realizing that dreaming too big only leads to disappointment?" Around the room, faces twisted in different expressions. Some diners looked genuinely disturbed, staring down at their plates as if trying to escape the discomfort. Others watched with morbid fascination. Few, very few, had the courage to appear openly outraged. "You need to understand how the world works," Grant continued, now with a voice laced in false compassion. "There are people like me, born to lead, to own, to decide. And there are people like you, born to serve. It's the natural order of things." Emily was trembling all over. The tears now streamed freely, not just from humiliation, but from the raw, merciless injustice this man embodied. Every word confirmed her worst fear, that no matter how hard she tried, how much she studied, how deeply she dreamed, there would always be someone ready to put her in her place. Mrs. Thompson finally managed to move around the table, heading to intervene. The manager, realizing the situation was spiraling completely out of control, also stepped forward. but both were still too far to stop what was happening. "Now do us all a favor," Grant concluded, his voice now louder, projected for everyone to hear. "Go back to the kitchen, or wherever people like you belong, and let us enjoy our evening in peace." It was in that moment of absolute despair, when Emily thought she couldn't possibly feel smaller or more powerless, that something unexpected happened. A hand appeared out of nowhere, large, strong, with long, powerful fingers. It landed firmly on Mr. Grant's shoulder, gripping it with enough force to be felt through the expensive fabric of his suit. Grant froze. His arrogant smile faltered for the first time. Something in the presence now rising behind him made the entire dining room hold its breath. It wasn't just physical stature, though that was considerable. It was an aura of natural authority, the kind that didn't come from wealth or status, but from something far deeper and more authentic. Emily looked up, her eyes still blurred by tears, and saw the man who had been watching everything from the corner table, tall, imposing, with a controlled calm that sharply contrasted with the cold fury in his eyes. A whisper of recognition rippled through the room like a wave. Even in her emotionally shattered state, Emily realized this was no ordinary man who had chosen to intervene. Time seemed to slow down inside Lucille. The hand on Mr. Grant's shoulder didn't loosen its grip, and the silence that had dominated the room acquired a new quality, no longer one of awkwardness, but of anticipation. Grant tried to turn around, irritated by the interruption. "Take your hand off my—" The words died in his throat when he finally saw who was holding him. The face staring at him was unmistakably familiar, the one that had been featured on posters, commercials, and sports magazines for decades. A face known not only by basketball fans but by virtually anyone who had lived in the past 30 years. Michael Jordan. He was there, in the flesh, in Lucille, wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit that accentuated his still impressive athletic frame, even years after his retirement from the courts. His presence transcended the physical. There was something magnetic about his demeanor, an almost palpable aura of greatness that didn't need to announce itself. "Sir," Jordan said in a calm yet firm voice, "I believe this conversation is over." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a statement. The news of his presence spread through the restaurant like wildfire. Heads turned, smartphones were subtly raised, conversations stopped completely. Even the waiters froze in their tracks, trays suspended in the air. "Michael Jordan! Is that really him? My God, it's him!" Whispers multiplied, but Jordan didn't pay them any mind. His eyes remained fixed on Grant, who had visibly paled. The man who moments before had exuded arrogance now seemed diminished, as though Jordan's presence had physically shrunk him. "Mr. Jordan," the restaurant manager approached quickly, the fear in his eyes replaced by an almost comical adoration. "We had no idea you were with us tonight. It's an absolute honor to have a legend like you in our establishment." Jordan didn't answer immediately. With a deliberately slow movement, he removed his hand from Grant's shoulder and took a step toward Emily, who was still frozen, tears streaming down her face. His eyes, gentle now, met hers. "Are you okay?" he asked, low enough to sound like a private conversation, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Emily simply nodded, unable to form words. The sudden transition from extreme humiliation to standing face to face with a living legend was too surreal to process. Jordan then turned back to Grant, who seemed to be recalculating his entire life strategy in real time. "Mr. Jordan, I didn't mean to cause any discomfort," Grant stammered, his voice now completely different, submissive, apologetic. "It was just a misunderstanding between Miss and me. Business stuff. You know how it is." The look Jordan gave Grant carried decades of experience dealing with people who underestimated others based on appearances. A look that held the memory of every closed door, every veiled comment, every obstacle he himself had faced in his journey. "Misunderstanding." Jordan's voice was controlled, but carried an intensity that made Grant instinctively take a step back. "I was sitting right there," he pointed to his table. "I heard every word. I saw every gesture." The entire restaurant seemed to collectively hold its breath. Mrs. Thompson watched the scene with a mix of relief and fascination. The manager alternated his gaze between Jordan and Grant, clearly recalculating where his loyalty should lie at that moment. I respect this place, Jordan continued, his eyes now sweeping the room, including everyone in the conversation. I've been coming here for years when I'm in town. Discreetly. No fanfare. He paused meaningfully. Because of the quality of the food and service. Not for the supposed exclusivity. He then turned back to Emily, studying her with an intensity that seemed to see beyond the surface. This young woman, he said, his voice now loud enough for everyone to hear clearly, has shown more class and dignity in the past 10 minutes than many who frequent this place have shown in their entire lives. A murmur of approval spread through a few tables. An elderly woman in a distant corner clapped discreetly. Jordan then turned to face Grant directly. Even though they were both tall men, there was something about Jordan's posture that made him seem even more imposing. Perhaps the years of competing at the highest level, perhaps the confidence of someone who had proven his worth repeatedly on the world stage. As for you, he said, each word heavy as stone, I suggest you reconsider your attitudes. This world is changing. People like you are being left behind. He made a gesture that seemed to encompass not just Grant, but an entire system. Grant, visibly sweating now, tried to recover some dignity. Look, it's nothing personal against her. It's just how things work. There are places for people like us and places for people like, well, you get it. A cold, calculated smile appeared on Jordan's face. The same smile millions had seen when he was about to execute a game-winning play against an opponent. People like us? He repeated, his voice now dangerously soft. He looked from Grant to Emily and back to Grant again. Then, with the same precision he had shown on the courts, Michael Jordan fired the words that completely silenced Luciel. Do you have any idea who you're humiliating? The question hung in the air like a sentence. It wasn't a threat. It was an impending revelation. Every person in the room seemed frozen in place, glasses suspended halfway to their mouths, utensils motionless on plates, breaths held. The silence in Luciel was absolute. That kind of silence that seems to have its own weight, that makes every held breath sound like distant thunder. Michael Jordan stood still, his stature dominating not just the physical space, but the emotional space of the restaurant. His eyes never left Mr. Grant's, who seemed to shrink with each passing second under that gaze. Do you have any idea who you're humiliating? Jordan's question still lingered in the air, thick with meaning. Grant swallowed hard, his Adam's apple visibly rising and falling. The arrogance that had fueled him minutes earlier had evaporated completely. Mr. Jordan, I didn't mean to… I'm not finished yet, Jordan interrupted, his voice calm, but with the same authority that had silenced opponents and reporters over decades. It wasn't a voice that needed to be raised to command attention. It was the kind of voice that, even at its lowest tone, made everyone in the room lean in to listen. He stepped to the side, symbolically placing himself between Emily and Grant, never breaking eye contact with the latter. You know what I see when I look at this young woman? Jordan gestured toward Emily without breaking his gaze from Grant. I see someone who works hard, someone who, despite all the closed doors, all the looks of disdain, all the no's she's probably heard in her life, still holds on to her dignity. Jordan finally turned to Emily, his gaze softening slightly. And you know what else? I see someone who probably has more courage in a single day than many will have in their entire lives. A murmur of approval spread through the restaurant. A few people nodded discreetly. The tension in the air began to transform into something different, an almost reverent expectation. Jordan turned to the room, now including everyone in his speech. I grew up in North Carolina in the 60s and 70s, he began, his voice taking on a reflective tone. I know exactly what it's like to be judged before you even open your mouth. I know what it means to have to prove yourself over and over again, while others just assume they deserve it. He paused, his eyes scanning the luxurious surroundings of the restaurant. Many of you know me as Michael Jordan, the basketball player, the guy from the championships, the commercials, the sneakers. But long before all of that, way before, I was just a black kid who many thought would never amount to anything. The restaurant was completely absorbed. Even the staff had stopped to listen. You know what I've learned in all these years? he continued, his gaze returning to Grant. That true greatness has absolutely nothing to do with the restaurant you dine in, the clothes you wear, or the car you drive. It has to do with how you treat people, especially those you think can't do anything for you. Jordan took another step toward Grant, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. The true character of a person doesn't show when they're surrounded by flatterers or when everything is going well. It shows exactly in moments like this, when you think you can humiliate someone lesser without consequences. Jordan then looked at Emily, who remained frozen, the tears now dry on her face, replaced by an expression of astonishment. This young lady is not just a little maid, as you said. She is a whole human being, with dreams, struggles, and dignity. He turned back to Grant. And you? What are you, beyond your money and your last name? A heavy silence fell over the room. Mrs. Thompson looked at Jordan with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. The manager, who moments earlier had tried to throw Emily out, now seemed to want to disappear into the shadows of the restaurant. You know, Jordan continued, now addressing the broader audience, I've spent a large part of my life on the courts learning that titles, points, records, none of that really matters in the end. What matters is respect. Not that respect based on fear or intimidation, but real respect, the kind that comes from recognizing another person's humanity. His eyes turned to Grant, who was trying to regain some composure, nervously adjusting his tie. Some of you might be thinking, who is Michael Jordan to give moral lessons? A slight smile touched his lips. And you'd be right to question, I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. But one thing I've learned, judging someone by their appearance, their background, or their job doesn't just diminish that person, it diminishes all of us as a society. Grant, seemingly composed, tried to intervene. Mr. Jordan, with all due respect, you don't understand the context of this situation. This young lady, she has a name, Jordan interrupted. Emily, she has a name. Use it. Grant cleared his throat, visibly irritated by the public correction. As I was saying, Emily wasn't authorized to take up space? To eat like any other human being? Jordan shook his head slowly. Listen to what you're saying. Really listen. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Grant stiffened, a spark of his old pride returning to his eyes. Mr. Jordan, I know your intention is noble, but there are protocols in places like this. There are reasons why certain establishments maintain certain standards. It was Jordan's turn to smile. Not a warm smile, but that competitive smile that millions of fans would instantly recognize. The smile that preceded a devastating move, a play that would change the game. Standards, he repeated, his tone now dangerously calm. Let's talk about standards then. He took one last step toward Grant, getting close enough that the man had to slightly tilt his head to maintain eye contact. You want to continue this conversation? Because I can assure you it won't end well for you. Jordan's voice lowered, but it carried an intensity that made Grant hesitate. So let's tell everyone here who you really are. The veiled threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. Grant's face visibly paled. For a moment, everything inside LaCiel froze. Mr. Grant, the same man who had been arrogantly laughing moments ago, now sweated under the weight of the presence of someone bigger than he could have ever imagined facing here. Michael Jordan didn't step back. He was still firm, and his eyes were like mirrors. Cold, exact, relentless. Do you really want to continue this conversation? Michael asked, his voice firm but still low, like a warning. Grant tried to maintain composure, but his eyes were already searching for support around him. He found none. The room was silent, and all eyes were on them. I don't understand what this has to do with me, Mr. Jordan. He tried to stammer. Michael took a step forward. It has everything to do with you, because I know your type, and I know what you've done. The words fell like stones. Grant blinked a few times. I was sitting there, Michael said, pointing to his table. I saw every gesture. I heard every word. And I know who you are. Charleston, 2019, 3 employees, bullying, threats, legal settlements with confidentiality clauses, then 2 more interns in 2021. Same tactic. The murmuring started, small but growing. Customers whispered. A man discreetly took his phone out of his pocket. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. Phones began to rise in trembling hands as if everyone felt they were witnessing something historic. Grant took a step back. This is a lie. There was never, nothing was proven, but there was a report. There was fear. There was abuse. And you know what else there was, Grant? Silence. The same kind of silence you were expecting here today. The restaurant manager, pale as the linen tablecloths, tried to intervene. Please, gentlemen, let's maintain decorum. Michael didn't pay him any attention. You thought you could attack a young woman and get away with it, like you always have, but tonight won't end the way you're used to. He turned slowly, stopping in front of Emily. She was still standing, motionless, but something in her eyes had changed. The shame had receded. The glimmer of dignity began to resurface behind the pain. Emily, he said gently, do you know what this man tried to do to you today? She shook her head as if still struggling to understand. He tried to extinguish your light, because men like him are afraid of those who shine without asking for permission. But you resisted. You spoke up, and you held your head high. Michael looked around the room. Everyone was listening, recording, feeling. This young woman has more courage than many people who frequent this restaurant. She's not here to serve anyone. She's here because she has value, because she deserves it, because she's human. He looked directly at Grant with coldness. And you? Who are you when no one's applauding you? When you don't have enough money to buy silence? Grant tried to step away, but now the phones were pointed at him. The videos were already being sent, shared. The room at Le Ciel was in absolute silence, a reverent silence. Michael Jordan stood before Emily, hand extended, eyes firm and kind. Michael turned again to Emily. His voice now had a different tone, something more intimate, more direct, a rare tenderness. Emily, would you like to have dinner with me? She hesitated. Here. Michael smiled. Here, at the main table, because today, those who don't respect are the ones who don't belong. She looked around. The tables were filled with familiar faces, well-dressed, motionless. People who moments ago had seen her as a mistake, an interruption. Now no one dared to say a word. Emily swallowed hard. Every part of her body screamed to refuse, to disappear. But there was something in Michael's eyes that made her want to stay. Slowly she nodded. Yes. Michael turned to the maître, still standing, embarrassed near the entrance. Bring an extra chair for my table, and bring the best wine in the house. Of course, Mr. Jordan, said the maître, his voice hurried, almost stumbling over his own feet to fulfill the order. Michael took Emily by the hand, walking firmly through the room, still in silence, as if they were crossing a bridge between two worlds. When they reached the table, he pulled out the chair for her. The gesture was simple, but full of meaning. Emily sat cautiously, her hands in her lap. Michael sat across from her, signaling for a waiter with a slight wave. Let's have dinner, and please tell the chef to make it special. My guest is extraordinary. The waiter, still visibly shaken by the previous scene, simply nodded. Emily stared at the still empty plate, the silverware perfectly aligned. Her fingers trembled slightly. Michael noticed. Are you okay? She took a deep breath. I'm trying to believe this is happening. It is, and it will keep happening. Because today, he looked around, his voice loud enough to reach all the tables. Those who don't respect are the ones who don't belong here. A few people applauded quietly. Others lowered their eyes, embarrassed. Most just watched, in silence, as if still processing what they had witnessed. Michael leaned toward Emily. Do you know why I asked for that chair? She shook her head. Because no one, anywhere, should be forced to stand while others dine in the comfort of privilege. You deserve to be here. And more than that, you deserve to be celebrated. Emily felt a tear slide down her face, but this time, she didn't hide it. There was no reason to hide anymore. At that moment, a sharp click cut through the air. At the table next to them, a man with a short beard and a navy blue blazer was discreetly gathering his phone. The screen's glow revealed a clear image. Emily sitting across from Michael Jordan, the world around them observing in silence. It was more than just a photo. It was a symbol. The image would spread across social media like wildfire. It would be headline news, debate, inspiration. But Emily didn't know that yet. "Someone's taking pictures," she whispered, glancing to the side. Michael gave a slight smile. "Let them. Some stories need to be seen." The orchestra, without anyone commanding it, began to play again. A soft, almost melancholic arrangement. It was as if the entire restaurant was trying to catch its breath. The maître returned with the wine, an aged Bordeaux, with a golden label. "For you and your guest." Michael took the glasses, poured his own, then hers. He raised his glass toward Emily. "A toast." She hesitated. "To what?" "To you, to your place at this table, and to all the other tables you will still conquer." Emily tapped her glass against his. The sound of the glass resonated in the air like a silent announcement of change. Little by little, the room started moving again. A waiter began serving again. A couple at the corner table asked for the check. But the looks, even if disguised, were still directed at her. For the first time, Emily felt like she wasn't invisible, nor decorative. She was the center, and not because of shame, but because of courage. "You know this is going to be on the internet, right?" Michael asked between sips. She nodded, a shy smile on her face. "Maybe my mom will see. I think she'll be proud." Michael smiled. "She already has plenty of reasons to be. She just didn't know yet how much the world needs to know." On the other side of the room, the reporter was already typing a caption. "Historic night. Michael Jordan interrupts luxury dinner to defend humiliated young black woman and seats her beside him." The camera click came right after. The sound of the toast still echoed when Emily set her glass down on the table. Her fingers were steady now. The hand that had once trembled under the white linen tablecloth now rested on her lap, as if it had finally found its place in the world. She looked around, and for the first time she didn't see judgmental glances. She saw looks of recognition. At the table next to hers, a woman with gray hair slightly raised her glass in her direction, in a restrained yet genuine gesture. Emily responded with a shy nod. 2 tables ahead, a man in a dark blue suit, who had been avoiding eye contact until then, tilted his head slightly. A sign of respect. For the first time that evening, Emily felt she didn't need to explain herself. Her presence spoke for itself. The waiters resumed circulating through the room. Conversations returned, quieter now, but with a different tone, as if the entire restaurant had undergone a fine-tuning of its collective consciousness. Even the music seemed softer, more human. Emily observed it all with attentive eyes. She saw the details that had previously escaped her, not out of distraction, but as self-defense. The flowers on the table, the shine of the chandeliers reflected in the glasses, the subtle warmth of the scented candles. Now she was present, whole. Michael watched her in silence, smiling lightly. He didn't need to say anything, just being there was enough. "Did you notice?" she said after a few minutes. "People are looking at me differently." "Of course they are," Michael replied. "Now they see you, not just as a guest, but as the protagonist." Emily laughed softly. "This is strange. I've never felt so exposed. But at the same time, I've never felt so free. It's because, for the first time, you're being seen the right way." She stared at the center of the room. Before, that space had seemed unreachable, reserved for the rich, the untouchables. Now she was there, not as an employee, not as an extra, but as part of the story. "You know this is going to be everywhere tomorrow, right?" Michael said, subtly pointing to the reporter who was pretending to eat, while his phone vibrated on the napkin. Emily nodded. "I know. Are you afraid?" "Maybe a little, but I also don't want to run from it. If this story can help someone, it's already worth it." Michael crossed his arms on the table, looking at her with more depth. "You know, when I was younger, I was told the world would try to make me small. Always. But I had to remember who I was. That if I forgot, they won. Is that what happened to me today?" "It was. And you didn't forget. You remembered. And you reminded us too." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment, absorbing what she was hearing. Then she lifted her head and looked around again. The environment had transformed. The same restaurant, but now with a different light. A light that came from within. With every bite the customers took, with every conversation resumed, there was an underlying message. She had won, against all odds, against cruelty, against the invisible system that always said, "This isn't for you." One of the waiters approached with the next course, delicately grilled scallops served over truffled mashed potatoes. He placed the plate down more carefully than usual. His eyes met Emily's for a brief moment. "It's an honor to serve you, miss," he said with a slight smile. She almost became emotional right there. "Thank you." The waiter stepped away, and Emily allowed herself to savor the dish. Each bite had a different taste now, the taste of dignity restored. Michael leaned slightly over the table. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "What is your true dream, Emily?" The question hung in the air with almost sacred weight. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a key, a door, an invitation. Emily was silent for a few seconds, her eyes filled with brightness, not with tears, but with possibilities. She took a deep breath and prepared herself to answer. That question carried weight, but it also carried permission. For the first time, someone was asking not what she did, but what she wanted to be. She gently placed the fork beside her plate, took a deep breath. For a moment, she seemed to search for the right words. Then, as if opening a door that had been locked for a long time, she began. "I've worked since I was 13. I started cleaning houses with my mom. Then when she got sick, I had to take over everything. I washed clothes for others, took care of kids, cleaned offices. I did everything." Michael just listened. No interruptions, just attentive eyes and full presence. "My mom, she got sick when she was young. Arthritis, then diabetes, and now her kidneys. The medicine is expensive. The doctor visits even more. Sometimes we had to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying a bottle of insulin. But she never complained. She never let me give up." Emily paused, her eyes moistening. She wasn't crying yet, but it was as if she were on the edge of an emotional cliff, ready to surrender. "I always wanted to take care of her the right way, give her everything she gave me, even with so little. And because of that, my biggest dream has always been to be a nurse. Not for status, not for money, but to understand, to know how to help, to never again feel helpless watching the ones I love suffer." Michael leaned back slightly in his chair, his chin firm, as if absorbing each syllable. "But there was never money to study. I even tried to sign up for an evening program at the community center, but the registration was on the same day my mom got sick. I ended up taking her to the hospital, and I lost the spot." Emily's voice trembled. "And it's not just that. Sometimes I felt like the world didn't want me to have this dream. Like it was only reserved for people born on the right side of town. Every time I entered a nice building, it was through the back door. Every time I spoke to a doctor, I was the companion. Never as someone with a name, with a story, with a future." She lowered her eyes. 2 tears rolled down, silently. "I was never treated with dignity. Not really. Today, here, was the first time I felt like I exist, like I am seen, like I matter." Michael remained silent, but his eyes, misty with tears, said more than words. When he finally spoke, his voice came out softly, heavy with contained emotion. "Emily, this dream is going to start now." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Michael straightened up. He grabbed a napkin and wiped away a tear that was about to fall. "I'm going to pay for your studies. College, books, transportation, whatever you need. You're going to be a nurse. You'll take care of your mom with the knowledge you've always wanted. And more than that, you're going to take care of yourself." Emily's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Completely." She covered her mouth with her hand, as if she needed to contain a scream coming from her chest. The tears fell, this time uncontrollably. They were different tears, of relief, of victory, of freedom. "But why?" The question came out in sobs, her voice cracking. Michael smiled, a smile full of memories. Because someone believed in me, and now it's my turn to give back. Emily lowered her head and cried. She cried like someone who carried years of pain and had finally found shelter. Michael extended his hand across the table. She took it without hesitation. Their hands met in the center of the white tablecloth, the skin marked by hard work and the touch of a man who knew struggle. And there, in the middle of the city's most expensive restaurant, the most human scene of the night unfolded. Simple, silent, powerful. On the other side of the room, the reporter interrupted the draft of his article. What he had just witnessed was more than a story. It was the climax of a real tale. Emily took a deep breath, trying to control her sobbing. "You have no idea what this means to me," Michael replied with a gentle squeeze of her hand. "I do. More than you think." Days later, the morning sun bathed the campus of the Atlanta School of Nursing with a soft, golden light. Students hurried between buildings, holding backpacks, books, and clipboards. Among them, a young black woman walked with firm steps, wearing a freshly pressed white uniform, with her ID badge hanging from her coat pocket. Emily. She exited the main door of the anatomy building, a physiology book in her hands and a smile on her face. One of those smiles that doesn't come from a joke or a compliment, but from a certainty she had arrived where they said she would never be. Her hair was now tied in a higher bun, practical for lab classes. Her skin, lit by the sun, contrasted with the rigidity of the uniform, as if saying, "I'm still the same, but now I'm stronger." Emily crossed the campus as if she belonged there, and she did. Her classmates greeted her with waves, some with brief smiles. One of them said, "Good job on yesterday's presentation, Emily." She responded with a shy nod, but full of pride. Outside, a bus waited at the stop. Emily climbed the steps and sat near the window. She watched the city pass by, but her mind was elsewhere. With each corner the bus turned, memories arose. The restaurant, the looks, the humiliation, and then the extended hand. Michael's gesture, the turning point that changed everything. Arriving at the simple neighborhood where she lived, she got off and walked along the familiar sidewalks. The flowers in her neighbor's window were still there. The children played with water from the garden hose. An elderly man waved from the balcony and said, "You're going to save lives, huh, doctor?" She smiled, pressing the books to her chest. When she opened the apartment door, she was greeted by the aroma of vegetable soup in the air. The small living room remained modest, but now it had a new shine. The walls were painted. A new fan spun on the ceiling, and on the couch her fragile and beloved mother was carefully rising, supported by her cane. "My daughter's home," she said with a wide smile. Emily placed the books on the table and went straight to hug her, a long, silent embrace full of meaning. "I saw you on TV again yesterday," her mother said, laughing. "The reporter called you Emily Parker, the student symbol of overcoming. Now you even have a symbol name." Emily laughed along, her eyes welling up. "I just want to be a good nurse, Mom. The rest is a bonus." Her mother looked at her with tenderness and caressed her face. "You're already more than I dreamed of, my daughter." Emily walked over to the wall beside the shelf. Among old photos and simple picture frames, there was a new one. It was an image captured on the most unlikely night of her life. She, sitting at the table with Michael Jordan, at Le Ciel, both smiling. Behind them, the glow of the restaurant and dozens of eyes focused on them. Below the image, a caption printed in delicate letters, "The night everything changed." Emily stood there, staring at the photo, as if looking into a mirror of the past. She remembered every detail, the warmth of the lights, the pressure in her chest, the taste of the wine. But above all, she remembered the words, "What's your real dream, Emily?" And now, months later, she no longer carried the doubt. She was living the answer. She turned to her mother, holding her gaze firmly. "Today I have class at the hospital. We'll see real patients. My first day in clinical rotation. Take it easy and treat each one of them like you wish we had been treated." "Back then," Emily nodded. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." Before leaving the house, she looked once more at the picture. She lightly touched the frame with the tips of her fingers and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the light wind stirred the leaves. The sky was clear, and the world seemed new. Emily continued on her way, no longer as the invisible girl who entered through the back, but as the woman who now knew her worth. Sometimes a cruel word can destroy us, but a gesture of respect can rebuild us. If this story touched you, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this one. Comment below what you thought of the story of Michael Jordan and Emily Parker. Your support makes all the difference.